So, in April, a new piece of bipartisan legislation was introduced into the U.S. Senate. This legislation, dubbed the Protecting Kids on Social Media Act, although that's not the real name, is sponsored by 4 senators, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So, Republican Tom Cotton of Arkansas, Katie Britt of Alabama, and Democrats Brian Schatz of Hawaii and Connecticut's Chris Murphy, which we've talked about how shitty Tom Cotton is on this show. It's and Brian Schatz is kind of cool. So I was like really curious. It really piqued my interest to see that they were co-sponsoring a bill about social media.
Yeah, I was so uncomfortable when I saw the proposal of this law because I'm like, Tom Cotton sponsored it? Oh, well, I'm definitely against it. And then Rand Paul argued against it, and I was like, oh, well, then I'm definitely for it. Fuck, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I can't do the normal thing that I do where I just agree with what I disagree with what Republicans say and agree with what Democrats say. I don't know what to do. Do I have to think for myself for once?
To be clear, that was a joke.
That was a joke.
That's not what we do on this show. We think about things for ourselves.
yeah. But I do think that sometimes people do have a tendency to try to fit everything into, some type of partisan ideological bubble. And this is one of those things. These are the types of conversations that I love having the most because it really doesn't come down to partisan ideology.
Yeah.
Which means that a lot of the arguments are much more merit-based than grandstanding.
Totally.
And I like that. Like, I like it when I wish that more issues were like that, where we could just argue on the merits of things and not just grandstand on the political, the political popularity or unpopularity of something.
Totally. So let's dig into what this bill does. So one, it prohibits children under the age of 13 from basically having accounts and logging into social media. So they can still technically access it, but they can't have an account. So if they're, if they have the ability, if the platform allows you to access without an account, they can, but they're not allowed to have an account. This is consistent with social media companies' policies already, as a result of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, but it's almost never enforced. And so this law would also require that the social media companies implement like pretty strict age verification systems, and it also like establishes the like a government provided like program to create age verification requirements and things like that.
Now, importantly, that part is not mandated.
Yes,
right?
They don't have to use the government's
companies
version.
can use the government, the government system, but they don't have to.
Yeah, exactly. And then another key thing that it does is it prohibits social media companies from recommending content using algorithms to users under the age of 18. So if you're 13 to 18, you're not allowed to be targeted with algorithms, which is called algorithmic boosting.
Yeah.
So that's another key thing that it does. And then like the third main social media impact that it has is that it actually requires a guardian's permission for users under 18 to create an account. So if you're under 13, banned from creating an account. 13 to 18, you have to get your guardian's permission to create an account. And 13 to 18, the social media companies are not allowed to use algorithmic boosting to show you, the thing that's going to keep your attention.
Yeah. And this is something that I don't know how Michael feels about yet. And he doesn't know how I feel about yet. So let's kind of walk through the things to consider when it comes to this law.
Totally.
Because if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that we usually tends to err on the side of a more civil libertarian approach. I think that I sometimes have that tendency, like maybe slightly more than Michael does, but I think we both kind of err on the side of, if it's when it comes to people's social lives, when it comes to like people's personal lives, keep the government out of that.
Yeah. And specifically, you tend to apply that to social media more directly than I tend to do that.
Yeah, exactly. But even the civil libertarian in me, like, does recognize that the calculus changes when we're talking about kids. Like,
Totally.
the calculus absolutely changes when we're talking about kids. Because, like, the civil libertarian in me says, like, the government shouldn't be there to protect you from yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the reason why you should put in a law that regulates a person's personal life or what they're doing is if that action can potentially harm somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You're free to swing your fist all you want, but the moment that it hits my face is the moment that you lose that freedom.
Yeah.
So, like, but of course, again, it changes when we're talking about children who do not have developed brains,
Yes.
completely developed brains. And
Totally.
as we also do know, another important consideration is that we know that there are some very well studied and very well documented harmful impacts on the developing of young brains
Mm-hmm.
with social media. We know that it contributes to body dysmorphia.
Mm-hmm.
We absolutely know that it contributes to political polarization, that it contributes to the spreading of misinformation, that if a kid is really young and you haven't spent a lot of time giving them the tools to be able to think critically about what's misinformation and what's good information,
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to be more susceptible to that. Although, to be fair, most boomers are just as susceptible to that shit.
Or most people, it's like, yeah.
I mean, yeah, most people, honestly, not even just boomers,
Yeah.
like, but yeah. So I think that there's definitely a good argument to be made that it is probably better for there to be limitations on how old a kid can be before they can use social media.
Mm-hmm.
So now the next question, I think, which, by the way, do you and I kind of agree on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the conversation typically focuses a lot on the downsides of social media and the risks and harms. I think it's worth talking about and being aware of some of the benefits of social media, because ultimately the question is like about how do we balance benefits and harms, and how do we implement a policy that's going to address the harms in a way that is most targeted at them without removing all of these benefits. That's the way, at least, I'm thinking about it. Because to your point, Nathan, like, I think we have less of an argument about a person's right to participate in public life, essentially, as a child. And so there's just less of a right to do that because there's more of a general interest in protecting kids from harm. So I think it's mostly about that balancing.
Yeah. So then the next question becomes, what role should the government play in that?
Mm-hmm.
Because again, we can make the argument that it might be better or it might be worse for a kid at this age or this age or this age to start being on social media.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question is that something that should be regulated by the federal government, that should be centralized?
Yep.
And I think that that's where the calculus becomes much more complicated. That's where I think I started to figure out where I stood on this, because I was looking at the arguments for and against this. I was looking at one of the things that I thought was really interesting. There's a Wired article that breaks it down and discusses some of the arguments that senators who are for it are saying, both Democrats and Republicans, some arguments that both Democrats and Republicans who are against it are saying. It even talked about how some of these senators have been talking about this within their own families, and there's been disagreement within their own families about what the right limitations are when it comes to social media. And I think that is a super interesting and super important conversation to have. And I'll tell you, like, on the last episode of the podcast, Jess and I revealed the fact that we are expecting.
Yeah.
That is public. And I was actually talking to Jess about this earlier today. We both basically agreed that around the age of like 12 or 13 is probably the age in which, you know, we'll be like, yeah, it's fine to start using social media. But prior to that, we're probably going to say like, I don't want you on social media yet. You know,
Sure.
because I think a lot of kids might not understand the, you know, the implications of what you post, the fact that some posts might follow you. I mean, I sometimes get, I sometimes
Memories on
get
Facebook.
memories on Facebook of shit that I said when I was like 16 getting over a
Dude, yeah.
breakup. And I'm just like, oh, fuck, dude, what were you even trying to say?
Dude, I periodically go through and delete the ones that are the worst. It's bad.
Like, I got a post that I apparently said when I was like 16 that the internet saw fit to remind me about, where I was like, you know, today I was in gym class and I was playing basketball and I kept shooting at the basket and I kept missing, but every now and then I would get it. But if I didn't try at all, I wouldn't have gotten any of them.
My
And it's
Jesus
like, oh,
fucking
dude,
Christ.
dude.
Oh my God.
And like
That's
at the
so
time,
cringe.
I remembered posting it. And at the time, I thought it was the most wholesome thing ever.
Yeah.
And now I look at it and I'm like, oh my God. So like, I totally understand wanting to protect kids from that. And I honestly, at this point, I'm probably going to protect my own kid from that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm probably going to say, you know, until you're 12, I don't want you on Facebook or social media or what. Like, I'm probably planning on doing that. But I think that there is so much disagreement and so much conversation to be had about this. I don't think that the solution should be centralized. I don't think that the government should be the ones that make this decision. I think that this is a decision that maybe, you know, you could encourage parents to make decisions.
Yep.
But I think that ultimately this is something that should come down to the parents, because, you know, parents know their kids the best, I think, in most situations. And I think that there's enough disagreement as to how you should handle social media that who are these senators to say what everybody else's approach should be, you know?
So I have so many thoughts. So I think you're right. I think I agree with you in a few dimensions. One, I think I largely agree that like a one size fits all approach to this kind of thing at this stage, where there are studies, but like there's still benefits, right?
Yeah.
Like to your point about like in their families they disagree. Like partially, I'm a little skeptical of that, only because like we know that social media is essentially addictive.
Yeah.
Like we know that,
And that's a problem.
Yeah, totally. According to a study from the American Psychological Association, about 50% of teens report at least one sign of having a clinical dependency on social media. And so, like, to me, that says disagreement around the dinner table is more like disagreement around the dinner table about whether we should be allowed to have drugs as children. It's like it's a little bit less of like, oh well, you know, two people can equally disagree about whether kids should be using this, and puts it more in the camp of like a kid's brain is not in the right position to be making a good call about whether they should be using it. To your point, though, there's no world in which a government ban can replace good parenting.
Yeah.
And good decisions as a family. Like
Yeah.
one critic of this law said like any 12-year-old can get past most age verification. Like it's like simply not going to be the thing that solves social media. Another thing,
I played so many online first person shooters that I was supposed to be 18 that I had to lie about my age for when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like so many. I was playing them when I was 11 years old.
Yeah, totally. And another, like one of the main reasons behind this bill is trying to draw the connection between social media and mental health crises. Like they specifically in their press releases talk about a CDC study which found that 42% of high schoolers surveyed experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness over like the single year studied, and 22% seriously contemplated suicide. And those numbers are stunning and horrible. especially when, they're juxtaposed to the fact that like overall screen use among teens has gone has like just from 2019 to 2021 increased 17%. And so like you're starting to put together a pretty fear-mongery picture about the relationship between social media and mental health. But one critic of this bill said, you're not going to solve the mental health crisis among teens by just banning them from social media.
Yeah.
In fact, it might make it worse, because we talked about like one of the benefits of social media is getting access to social connection. One of the recognized benefits from the APA, who is pretty critical of social media in general, is that it allows people, especially teens that might be ostracized from their local environment, to connect with people that are like them or more diverse groups of people than they might be exposed to in person.
Yeah. I mean, I was an autistic teen in rural Virginia.
Yeah.
And I didn't know a lot of other autistics.
Mm-hmm.
But there are communities online in which neurodivergent people really thrive. And in fact, in a lot of ways, social media is a medium in which it's a lot easier for neurodivergent people to be able to communicate and be part of the conversation because, you don't have to read body language. You don't have to read social cues, or you don't have to look people in the eye.
Yeah.
Like, or other things that you're expected to do in conversation. When you talk to somebody, you don't have to prevent yourself from stimming or masking. You can just type and then read the response. And it's actually, and that's a medium. That's a mechanism that makes it a lot easier for neurodivergent people to be able to thrive. And I mean, on top of that, what about LGBT youth?
Yes,
that
seriously.
that live in like rural America.
They might be closeted everywhere except their social media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they might be able to find a community that helps them, accept who they are, helps them, embrace who they are. And I think if you just take that away from them unilaterally, I think that is too much of a one size fits all thing. Like, even if it's a law that benefits 80% of youth.
Sure.
Well, what about the 20% of youth that it doesn't benefit?
Totally.
And for the 80% of youth that these type of limitations would benefit, I think that should be left up to the parents. I think that should be left up to what the parents think is best for the kid. Now, the one thing I will say about this law, like I disagree about the ban. I disagree with the ban. I disagree with the, like, you have to require parental consent during this time to get a social media. I disagree with that, because I mean, maybe it's going to be different now that like more and more parents grew up in the technological age. But like, I remember when I first started on social media, my parents didn't understand a damn thing about it, and they were just kind of like, I doubt I would even be able to get them to figure out what the verification process was. But I think I do agree with banning algorithmic targeting for people who are under 18. I think I do agree with that.
I totally agree with you. And I think ultimately, like, the ban is in many now, partially I'm like, I could go either way, because it's under 13. 13 is like 12 years is so young. It's so young. But to your point, like, there are benefits. There are things that we might get from this, and it's not clearly a slam dunk that it should be banned. But I think it is entirely a slam dunk that algorithmic boosting should be banned for people under 18. Maybe everyone everywhere, but that's a different conversation. But like, the APA was like put out a few statements about this, and the things that they discussed as like reasons to ban social media for kids like under 18 are really reasons to mostly ban algorithmic boosting. So like, one of them is that, during early adulthood is like, and like basically puberty through early adulthood is like an incredibly important and risky part, like developmental phase. It's a period during which your brain is developing a ton. It's a period where you are craving almost more than ever before social rewards without much of the judgment that comes later in life to determine what you might like what you might be giving up. They crave visibility and attention and positive feedback from peers. It is a documented period where you are at hypersensitivity for the inputs like the cravings that social media directly like satisfies in ways that are not beneficial, like you might have if you're, you know, having more, you know, quote unquote, like typical non-online experiences or like social media exclusive experiences. It's also a time when you have lower amounts of judgment relative to later in life for deciding to step away from social media. And all of this is like exacerbated by algorithmic boosting, which is just an incredibly effective way to get you to spend tons and tons and tons of time engaging with the platform. You've got incredibly powerful computers that are just pointed at your individual brain, determining the best way to keep you looking at this device. And you're at especially high risk of like being, you know, like totally addicted to that experience as a teenager. So I totally agree with you. I think it could go further. I think I would love to see a world where social media companies are not allowed to make ad revenue from underage users. So if you're under 18, you're not valuable in terms of monetary content for a social media company. I think that could be really powerful.
I could get on board with that.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a libertarian paternalist thing. We're just going to set up the incentives such that people can do what they want, but we're disincentivizing over-targeting at these particular people. I think ultimately those are the solutions that are going to drive the most benefit and the least detriment from like federal legislation.
I could potentially get on board with that.
And I just came up with that one on my own.
That's an interesting idea.
Okay.
We did the thing again.
We did the thing where we didn't know that we would agree, and then we went and did research, and then we ended up agreeing.
So did I sway you at all, or were you already pretty much like yes or like no?
I
yes,
think you did
law?
sway me. I think I was less convinced that the ban was like a bad idea. I thought it was just kind of like not the best idea, but I think you did sway me on that one.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And actually, I will say I wasn't completely sure about the algorithmic banning at first. I think that there was a lot of things that you said that kind of like that was the one where I was kind of back and forth on, but there were a lot of things that you said that kind of swayed me on that.
Nice. It also just seems like the right role for government to play. Don't restrict the people's individual actions. Restrict corporations' ability to, take advantage of people.